Hello everyone, welcome to Talbot House. My name is Simon and I'm one of the storytellers here at the Soldiers Club. Now, if you go back 100 years ago, Talbot House would have been one of the most famous soldiers club of the Great War. Sadly, due to the current climate, we are temporarily closed, but we still would love to give you a virtual tour and understanding of what this club meant and still is today. So hopefully you enjoy the presentation you are about to receive. If you have any questions, please drop us a line as well. Hopefully you can visit us one day in real life as well and experience for yourself what Talbot House really meant to the soldiers 100 years ago and really its purpose still today. Enjoy the presentation.
So before we start telling you a little bit more about Talbot House itself, first I'd like to sketch the scene and tell you a little bit about life behind the lines and the area Talbot House is set in. Now, welcome to Pops, or Poperinge, unpronounceable to most of the troops who pass through. Now, as you can see on the map, Pops is situated something like 10-15 miles away from the front line, which was situated in a town called Ypres or Wipers, where they had a salient bulge in the line, as you can see. Now, those 10 to 15 miles actually saved the city from absolute destruction. Ypres, almost annihilated, was the front town. Poperinge was its garrison town and didn't come out of the war unscathed, but let's say it wasn't completely destroyed. Now, Poperinge also was the first unoccupied city in Belgium, one of the very last ones left, unoccupied by the Germans, but of course very much occupied by the British Army, as you can see. Most of the soldiers, one way or another, always came back through Poperinge. If you survived your spell in the trenches, you would come back most likely via this route you see here for your billets. If you were lucky and an officer, there's a good chance you'd be billeted in one of the houses in town or perhaps one of the farmsteads. Now, for most other soldiers, you'd end up in one of the tent camps. Now, Poperinge is a hop growing area, and on the photograph behind us here you can see the hops growing in the fields. A rare example because most fields of course were emptied, and as far as the eye could see you would have tents, barracks and huts set up for the multitude of troops that needed accommodation. Conditions in these camps are often always a trial. Hygiene was a huge problem, and you can imagine the vermin was rife. As usual, soldiers tried to make the most of their conditions. As we said, usually one way or another you'd end back in Poperinge. Even if you got wounded in the Ypres salient, you would still end up in one of the casualty clearing stations here in Pops, be it as a walking wounded soldier or if you were badly wounded, driven by ambulance. Here you can see the entrance of one of the casualty clearing stations, one of 12 we used to have in the Pops area, with the receiving tent right there and the drop-off area for the ambulances. Now, at these facilities, some of the world's renowned doctors and top surgeons made huge advances in medicine, including on the photograph here we have the father of neurology, Harvey Cushing. But as we said, you always end up back in Pops. Even the ones who didn't make it are still with us today. On Listen Cemetery, almost 10,000 headstones remind us of their sacrifice. Now, this is a system and there is no way out of the system. You once in a while had a day's leave to spend in Pops, but after that you had to go back to the trenches. If you did try to get out of the system, there is a silent reminder on the town hall of Poperinge of what happened to those men. On the courtyard, at least 4 soldiers of the British Empire were executed, shot at dawn. It's all quite depressing, but don't forget, Poperinge was considered to be one of the 7 wonders of the world at the time. The other 6 were temporarily disregarded. For instance, have a look at the railway stations. We used to have 12 of them. Have a look at this photograph. You can see some British soldiers with trench caps, some Kiwis with lemon squeezes embarking as well, some kilted soldiers in the background. But what about those 3 blokes looking down upon all this from the right hand side? 3 Chinese labourers, a class of civilizations, asking themselves what the hell is going on here. Now, besides the 12 railway stations, we had multiple headquarters where lots of spies were active, of course, as well. 5 airfields in Poperinge. Now, today the closest one is over 2 hours away. So Poperinge really had everything in the make to be a huge metropole. Poperinge rapidly turned from a small provincial town into a huge metropole with over 250,000 inhabitants, including of course many British soldiers, accompanied by lots of refugees, and some of the local inhabitants decided to stay as well. All of them had to make ends meet and all of them had to live together. Of course had to get used to the British war machine with all of the transports going through. They even used London double-deck buses to ship the soldiers from and to the front line. Often, still today, we find tourists complaining about the one-way system introduced into Poperinge, while we of course like to remind them that this actually was a British invention, as was the ring road in Poperinge, constructed by Chinese labourers. If you look closely, the switch road is still there today. Now, for a lot of local people, it also meant the clash of civilizations. Some of these Indian soldiers you see on the photograph here even made it on postcards. They were so exotic to the locals. Now imagine what they thought of Chinese New Year when the fireworks went off and the dragons appeared. The locals ran to the village priest calling that the devil had come for them. Of course the Chinese, thousands of them in the area, meant well. They worked continuously on the railway lines, on the roads. An awful lot of them stayed behind at the end of the war to clean up the area and get rid of, for instance, a lot of the unexploded devices. Life in the Poperinge town centre of course changed dramatically. The town may have been a few miles behind the lines, but it was still in range of the German big guns, and of course air raids were a very common thing. Proof of that is this photograph of a funeral procession. Now, the arrival of British troops often was a blessing for local people as well, because they brought with them an awful lot of employment. Here you can see some of the local ladies employed in the laundry facilities that were set up. The British soldiers also missed their own children, so they took a fancy of the local kids that were around. The photograph here shows the Bateau family. The father retrained to become a photographer, to take photographs of the wealthy British officers in their fancy uniforms. And his children had a 5-year-long holiday. Jean, or Jeanne, as you can see on the photograph, would later also make her appearance at Talbot House. More on that story in a minute. Now on this photograph here you can see some of the refugee children that were sent abroad to what we call a colony in France, where they were taught in a foreign language, French, away from their siblings mostly, and away from mum and dad for 4 long years. In this photograph you can see my own great-grandmother, who was sent to France, taught in a foreign language to her, French, for 4 long years. When she finally returned, she hardly recognized her own father, who then had to inform her of the passing away of her own mother due to the Spanish flu. Now, not all news in Poperinge was bad. Soldiers loved coming to Pops, to go to the cinemas, for instance. Charlie Chaplin was hugely popular. Go to the theatre, play sports, rugby, football, hockey, or go shopping. They all had a sweetheart back home, so they loved buying some lace for them, of course. Now, on some of these photographs, you can see the men having fun, as well as some of the local monks joining in. Soldiers also took some selfies, as you can see, pretending to be Germans and getting shot, for instance. Now I love the next photograph, where you can see a local shop that says Greengrocer Wholesale Retail. Imagine, I wonder what the local owner must have thought he put on. Did he know what it meant? He also advertises for fresh fish and oysters. No chance in Pops. Now, some of the soldiers got to know Poperinge, let's say, in a different light of day. They loved going to the local pubs and cafes. You have to know 1 and 2 houses in Poperinge at the time offered some entertainment to the boys. The local beer and the spirits weren't too healthy either. Depending on your nationality and especially your rank, some clubs were off limit and others were then again allowed. Like for instance Allo Poupée, where the lovely 14-year-old Ginger was waiting on the soldiers, or Skindles if he could afford it, fancy officers club down the road in Poperinge. Now everything entertainment wise was segregated, a huge divide between the normal soldiers and NCOs and the officers again. Now some other forms of illegal entertainment included gambling. Soldiers lost all their money, got drunk, started a fight, you know how it ends, doesn't go well. And of course some more homely comforts were available to the men as well. Again segregated, blue lights for officers and the red light district for the normal soldiers. I don't have to tell you how many diseases and broken up marriages came from this. So again the army thought these forms of entertainment might be fun for some, but they're not a healthy approach. We need healthy soldiers to win this war. So an alternative form of entertainment was required. This leads us to Talbot House. We'll tell you all about the club in a minute, but first let's have a look at our concert hall. We'll give you a taste of what entertainment back then looked like in Poperinge. Now, the room we usually show this presentation in is our old hop store next to Talbot House. Empty by 1917 and hence commandeered by the British Army because they ran out of space in the actual Talbot House. So here on a daily basis they provided cinemas, concert parties, debates and even chapel services in the Talbot House concert hall. So tonight we've got for you the Happy Hoppers show, of which we know that everything you're about to see is based on authentic archive footage. Enjoy the show and mind the ostrich.
Hey look, they've got the runny ones on Friday.
Well, I hope I'm here to see it. Who's on tonight then?
The Happy Hoppers. Any good?
Never heard of them.
We are the Happy Hoppers. We bring you the showstoppers. Welcome to our...
Thank you very much indeed. Aren't they marvellous? Aren't they marvellous? Now I was in Blighty last month having a quiet drink, and an old fella comes up to me and he says, "Young man, that's a good start," I said. "Why aren't you doing your bit?" "My bit?" I said. "Yes, your bit." "I am," I said. "It's a show." "I'll show you," he said. "Not here," I said. "People are looking." "Where's your gun?" he said. "My gun," I said. "Yes, your gun to shoot the Hun." "Me with a gun to shoot the Hun? Do you want us to lose the war?"
He went and died, which is just what the best men do. So it's knock out your pipes and follow me, and it's finish up your swipes and follow me. Oh, walk to the big drum calling, follow me, follow me.
Quiet, and I'll see if I can persuade her to come out. All right? Ivy, you're on.
Neath the dear old garden wall. Glad to bring you our showstoppers. Now you've seen our little show, it's time for all of us to go. You've made the hoppers happy by being very clappy. We all love to hear your cheers. Now it's time to have some beers. Goodbye till we meet again. Come back and do the same. That we must go is plain before we go insane. Good night from the Happy Hoppers Show.
Now back to Talbot House. As you might remember, an awful lot of unhealthy forms of entertainment were available in the town centre, and the British Army required the opening of a new club, a healthy alternative. The first thing you require when opening a new club is the men to run it. So in the photograph you see Reverend Neville Talbot and Reverend Philip Clayton, nicknamed Tubby. More on them in a minute. The second thing you need is a house, your club house. So they were informed by the town major that the local Coofwood family was about to vacate their gentry home in the main street because of a shell that had impacted on the back of the house. Now they were financially persuaded to rent it to the British Army on a few conditions as well, and hence they moved out in December 1915, making it ready for Tubby to open his new club. Now, what about the name? They were going to call it Church House. Can you imagine? Church House. I wonder how many of the people watching this movie would actually go into a place called Church House. So very quickly, before even the sign was put up, they were ordered by a passing colonel to change the name. What should we change it in then if we can't name it after the Lord? Well, name it after yourselves for all I care. Hence, Talbot House. Named not just after Neville Talbot, but especially after his younger brother, Gilbert Talbot, a 21-year-old young officer who had a whole career ahead of him. One of the boys of the golden generation, let's say, who never were to be able to go back home. And who are the people we want to attract in this house? Well, young people. So let's name it after one of them. The other thing the entrance sign gives away is the first house rule. Every man's club. Meaning as soon as you step into the club, everyone is treated equally. There's no distinction, rank, race or gender. Here, a general would be treated the same as an Australian sergeant, for instance. Throughout the house you'll find many more signs and house rules. A visit to the club was a real unique experience, as one soldier put it. When pushing through the door of Talbot House, I found myself at once in a different world. I felt amazing. It was like Alice stepping through the looking glass. There were soldiers all around me, of course, and an army slang in the air. But in stepping across that threshold, I seemed to have left behind me all the depression and weariness of the street. There were carpets and curtains, pictures and flowers in vases. No, do not spit notices were put up, but the human invitation, if you're in the habit of spitting on the carpet at home, please spit here. So who's this fella who came up with all of this? The innkeeper, Tubby as we know him, has a magnetic personality. It would be hard to imagine anyone less military looking than Reverend Clayton. He's only 5'2" and a teabag for his hair. Clothing's always a trial. Buttons do persist in coming off. Breeches do grape at the knees. Shirt cuffs do wear out. He puffs on his pipe, then forgets all about it, puts it in his pocket. Next thing you hear, he's on fire again. Now, Tubby was admirably assisted by number 239, Private Arthur Pettifer, seen here on the photograph. He had 31 years of service around the globe in the British Empire and was suddenly in 1915 made ADC to Reverend Clayton. You can't have imagined two more different characters, but they worked incredibly well together. Pettifer managed to scrounge an awful lot of things for the house. They were always in need of one thing or another. Now, locally he was known as the General, as you can see how he signed his photograph. The house was set up in different floors, each floor catering for a specific need of the soldiers. The ground floor is the realm of the body. There used to be maps all over the wall, not just of the front line, but of Blighty, London and even Australia and Canada. Through the door you used to have a shop which had a Merry Christmas atmosphere all year round. And a music room beyond with an irresistible old piano, not likely to be come by honestly. Looking straight through the hall, you can catch a glimpse of the well-kept garden where men are basking as in St. James's Park, and a snug concert hall as well in the old hop store that lies beyond. This truly is the realm of the body. A lot of the British soldiers missed their kids back home, so they organised Christmas and St. Nicholas parties for the local kids. You might recognise the bearded man on the photograph, and somewhere at the bottom is Jeanne Bateux, whom we met earlier, one of the local children in Poperinge. Jeanne kept coming to Talbot House till her dying day, aged well in her 90s. Now for a moment try and picture the soldiers there 100 years ago who were used to sitting in muddy trenches filled with water, dirty camps, lice everywhere, vermin, and suddenly you're surrounded by a green lush garden just like the one you've got back home. Soldiers who loved gardening were asked to volunteer and help out as they did with anything in the house. Do as you do at home, that's the spirit of Talbot House. Now many a soldier would sit back, relax, perhaps do some drawing as Eric Kennington did. His sketches remain in the house till today. Now many a soldier was looking for a friend they knew from back home, so they took a pencil and started scribbling messages on the walls, and people would reply. That's how we, for instance, know of the story of Lance Corporal Quinn, who found to his tense amazement one day that his own brother had been in the house the previous day. They had not met for several years. Could he now be found and summoned, he asked Tubby. Tubby's reply is all-inspiring. I took fire at this and went straight down to the town major's office. There I learned that the Brothers Battalion had just moved south. I took a signal form and drafted the most official wire to the adjutant of the Brothers Battalion, insisting that Private Quinn should be sent back immediately to the town major's office. No reason was given. I wonder what the adjutant must have thought. But sure enough, it worked, and the two brothers met in Talbot House that very afternoon. It was well they did, for one was killed soon afterwards. This is Talbot House as well. Today the canteen remains a very homely place. Come inside for a chat with the warden, the kettle is always on, or tickle the ivories on the old piano. This truly is the realm of the body, still today. As Rudyard Kipling used to say, come upstairs and risk meeting the chaplain. And again here they try to create a homely atmosphere with some recognizable tunes. And upstairs we find the realm of the mind, with plenty of signs and notices put up again as usual, and several bedrooms as well which were part-time use for accommodation. Also we find Tubby's study here, where tea parties would be a common practice. This is where a staff captain, a general and a Canadian private could debate about football. Here this is possible. Outside you had to salute, but once inside these doors, all rank is abandoned.
A middle-aged driver, chiefly like one in search of a £5 loan, Tubby writes. I asked, I hope courteously, what he wanted, whereupon the driver replied, I could only find a small Cambridge manual in your library on the Paleolithic man. You wouldn't have anything less elementary now, would you? I glanced sideways at the wireless boy, the St. John's undergraduate, and saw that my astonishment was nothing to his. He broke in, addressing the driver. Excuse me, sir, but surely I used to come to your lectures at college. Possibly, replied the driver, but mules are my speciality today. And in the Talbot House library there were some 4,000 English titles available, quite something for a bombed Belgian city. Now, how did it work in practice? You had to leave your army cap as a pawn in exchange for the book. So the soldier, the book and the cap would remain in the same building, otherwise it'd be scrounged again. Other alternative forms of entertainment were available. For instance, the Canadian lounge was set up on the flat roof, a tent organised by some Newfoundlanders where chess and other board games could be played, as well as darts and ping pong. Now we go up another level where during the First World War, for at least a brief time, there used to be a real life-size billiard table available, one of very few in Poperinge at the time, of course. For more information on that story, check our YouTube channel for the full tale, I would say. Now upstairs to the upper room with Tubby. Here you are on holier ground perhaps than any, even in the salient. Perhaps 100,000 men during the 3 years have climbed the stairs before you. Certainly some 20,000 all have received the sacrament. Some 800 have been confirmed, and some 50 grown men were baptized. The idlest mind would reverence the place, and you, I know, will kneel. Now, despite protest at first by the Royal Engineers, Tubby persisted and went on to put 125 full-grown men and 30 more on the stairs for daily services. An awful lot of artifacts were come by or donated one way or another. Pettifer turned out to be the ideal scrounger, turning up one day with a stolen carpet from the neighbour's back door. They weren't going to need it because they had fled to the south of France. Tubby protested and said, I cannot kneel on a stolen carpet. Whereupon Pettifer replied, put it in the lounge then, you're not kneeling there. The candlesticks, for instance, were liberated from a 4-poster bed. The carpenter's bench was used as an altar, and one way or another the artifacts all found their way to the chapel, some of them even from the Ypres Cathedral. One artifact does stand out, donated by Major Street, the small old harmonium. This grown box, though much given to the weakness at the knees, served us faithfully for 6 months. In Holy Week 1916 we managed to borrow Geoffrey Gardner, the organist of the Royal Philharmonic Society. A little bit of heavenly music could touch the soul. There was no compulsion to use the chapel, yet if you did use it, you realized that the foundations of the house were in the roof. The services with the old chants and the hymns helped you to face the unknown tomorrow. Here, away from the noise and the squalor, you could find comfort, guidance and strength.
Here you could find refreshment for the soul. Why did so many visit the chapel? What you have to try and grasp is that these men were here to try and find the courage to face the trenches again. Because as soon as they left Talbot House, a lot of them had to return to the front line, not knowing if they're ever going to see this place again. And they said their goodbyes to Tubby. He used to say it was beastly shaking hands with these young fellows who came and said goodbye in case we don't come back. So hopefully you enjoyed the talk and we can welcome you one day in Talbot House again. Don't forget the kettle's always on, garden's looking lovely, and welcome home. Thank you.